Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last webinar of the year for the Biochemistry Society in Portland Press. So putting on this webinar in conjunction with ELRIG, and we're going to focus on early career research. And what you're going to hear today, first of all, are going to be some brief resumes from our panelists, explaining how they came to be employed in the molecular biosciences arena. Many different things you can do with that background, of course, and you'll be hearing about some of them today. Then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, in fact, through using the text box facility on your screens. You'll be able to ask questions as we go through, and we'll take those after the panelists have spoken. So briefly to introduce myself, my name is Malcolm Weir. I'm a biochemist by training, biochemist and biophysicist. That was my grounding at BSc and PhD. Then I went on to work for Glaxo and Glaxo Wellcome, as they were then, in the pharmaceutical sector. Very exciting job involved in setting up structure-based drug discovery, so lots of structures of protein targets against which we want to raise different small molecules that are highly differentiated and good drug molecules. And I've kind of continued doing that in various forms ever since, but those various forms are very different. So in the biotechnology sector, which I moved into in 2000, then I've been involved in raising money, venture capital, doing deals with pharma companies, recruiting and building 2 companies, and one of them I'm still at, which is the Heptares, part of Sosei Heptares. We are a Japanese company based in Tokyo, and the Heptares startup and biotech company that we built since 2006 was acquired by Sosei Group about 5 years ago. So that's kind of got me to where I've got to today. I'm a trustee of the Biochem and I'd just like to hand over now. Well, the first thing actually is to hear a video from Dominika Gruszka, who is one of our ECR representatives, and she's going to tell you kind of what it's all about. And so I'll hand over to Sandra now, who will kick off the video.
Good afternoon. I am Dominika Gruszka, the Early Career Trustee and Chair of the Early Career Advisory Panel of the Biochemical Society. I would like to welcome you all to the first webinar of our new series focused on career support and guidance for early career researchers. This dedicated series of webinars has been created in response to the widespread cancellation of face-to-face events due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with an aim to support the early career members of the Biochemical Society and junior members of the bioscience community more broadly. This is just one of a number of the Society's initiatives developed to support researchers in the early stages of their careers during these unprecedented times. Some of you may have already attended the first of our research-focused webinars for the early career researchers, which were initiated last month and which will continue in the new year. So do look out for these as well. Please check the Society's website or our monthly members newsletter if you're already a member to find out more about these programs and the opportunities to get involved. I hope you enjoyed this webinar on industry careers, and we look forward to hosting more early career researcher-focused webinars in the months ahead. Thank you.
Hello, hopefully I'm back on stream now. So thanks to to Dominika in the virtual form. And I will now introduce you to the panelists. Very briefly, just to name everybody, firstly, you'll hear from Gerard Collins, who's a colleague of mine at Sosei Heptares. He runs human resources there. And then we'll hear from Scott Cribbs, a business development director at Nexcelom Bioscience, and that's associated with ELRIG. And then from Panchali Goswami, scientific investigator at GSK, and from Jennifer Mitchell, who's at Redx, and also an ELRIG member, board member at ELRIG. So over to you guys. Gerard first, and you do your bit, then hand on to Scott, and so forth.
Thank you, Malcolm. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event. So I'm Gerard Collins, HR Director at Sosei Heptares, so work very closely with Malcolm. My background is probably a bit different to many people on this call today. I did a degree in politics and law. I joined the National Health Service as a graduate management trainee, where I spent a couple of years, primarily focused in HR type roles. I then joined the international arm of British Telecom, where I was an HR manager. I then spent 2 or 3 years as a management consultant. In the late 90s, I joined Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, where I spent most of my working life, 22 years actually. And I was, my most recent role there was as the International HR Director for the Research and Development part of the business. I joined Sosei Heptares as HR Director just over a year ago, and I have responsibility for leading the HR team, as well as being a colleague of Malcolm's on the management team. In addition to my day job, as I call it, I also lecture in the Open University. I lecture on their MBA program and the MSc in Human Resource Management. In summary, I've spent most of my working life in the life sciences, and I think it's a really exciting industry to work in, particularly as evidenced at the moment by the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I look forward to the debate this afternoon and will gladly take any questions you may have about careers within the industry. Thank you. I'll pass over to Scott now.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can understand my Scottish and not my English, but I'll do my best to speak slowly. I became a scientist with a grandiose idea of wanting to help, to discover something to get a drug to market, to cure some condition, to make the world a better and safer place. But I guess that given the fact that my father was actually a salesman, I was always destined to join the dark side of sales. Prior to that, I started my career off with a degree in biochemistry at Glasgow University. I then moved to Oxford to work for the infamous biotech company called British Biotech. Here is where I gained my first experience in assay development, which has taken me throughout my career. This was in the area of chemokines. In a world before we even knew that CCR5 and CXCR4 were the HIV co-receptors, which makes me feel really, really old. I then moved back to Glasgow, hence the accent, to do a PhD in chemokine area at the Beatson Institute for Cancer Research. And although I was told not having a PhD wouldn't hinder my progress, I also experienced in firsthand that sadly it wasn't helping either. My PhD wasn't an easy PhD, as most seem to be. It was 4 years of real character building with an extension, no publications, but all that mattered is I managed to get that PhD. My next step was into a diagnostic company in Dundee. Here I was instrumental in developing 2 genetic ELISA-based markers, one for osteoporosis, which thankfully doesn't affect men that often, and a more relevant one considering that prior to COVID, I spent 50 to 70% of my role traveling by air. So this was for a, a marker called factor V Leiden, which tells you if you're prone to DVT, so deep vein thrombosis, and thankfully genetically I'm not. Next, I spent 2 wonderful years in the pharmaceutical industry at AstraZeneca. I was in a very unique position here as I was actually employed by a commercial company called Applied Biosystems. And here I was employed to develop high throughput screening assays for chemokines on the Applied Biosystems platform at AstraZeneca. This is where I started to hone my skills of assay development within pharma and more in the commercial world with Applied. I then left AstraZeneca to become the European application specialist for Applied Biosystems, and that started my real interaction to the commercial world. As an application specialist, you work hand in hand with your salesperson and help them sell your products by consulting and developing solutions and assays for your customers. You perform demos, you talk at conferences, perform installation and trainings. And over the years, I've worked for various companies, and in my most recent company, Nexcelom Bioscience, I've moved up the ladder somewhat from a field application specialist to a field application manager, director of applications and new technologies, and finally turned fully to the dark side, as I call it, to become a business development manager in my current role. I have a team of 11 whose ultimate aim is to educate the EMEAI region, so the Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India, on our products, the importance of accurate cell counting and image analysis for drug screening, with the ultimate aim, of course, of selling our products. I got involved in the ELRIG network process when I organise conferences, mainly in Scotland because of obviously where I'm based, but it's a really interesting place to be involved in as well, and it allows me to give something back to scientists as well as doing my day job.
Yeah. Panchali, can you pick up now? You're on. Sandra? No. I can't hear. Can't hear. Sandra?
Oh yes, I think I'm unmuted now. Hello.
That's better.
Okay. Hi everyone. Yeah. Sorry for the glitch. Hi everyone. I'm Panchali. So I have a very adventurous scientific career. So to begin with, I had a master's from a remote area, and then I was offered a fellowship by the Max Planck Institute of Biophysics in Frankfurt to pursue a PhD. So I moved on to I moved to Frankfurt, and I did a PhD in membrane structural biology, membrane protein structural biology, and I did cryo-EM then. So that was before the revolution, so it wasn't that easy. I mean, it's technologically much advanced now, and that too with membrane protein. So I decided, okay, maybe I do something completely different. And at that juncture, as being a woman in science, I had to balance my family, and I followed my husband to Luxembourg, and I found a very interesting, completely different scientific area. So lung cancer proteomics. So I spent some time there doing something very different, but I enjoyed every bit of it. And at that time, the cryo-EM revolution happened, and that was my first love. I thought, maybe I go back and see what now it can offer. So I moved to London. Initially it was the Cancer Research UK, and now we became part of the Francis Crick Institute. So there, I again took up cryo-EM to study DNA replication proteins. And after that, I saw this position at GlaxoSmithKline, which was really a mix of what I had experienced, like, you know, my background, and it was cryo-EM, structural biology, and of course biochemistry. So I moved to join GlaxoSmithKline, and I have been there pursuing, trying to support development of drugs by structural biology efforts. Yeah, over to you.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Hi everybody, my name is Jennifer Mitchell. I'm currently a research scientist at Redx Pharma. So my career in science first started when I went to the University of Liverpool, and I completed an integrated undergraduate and master's degree called an MBioSci. And it was during that time that I really developed my love and passion for science to begin with. I wasn't really too sure kind of which area of the life sciences I wanted to be involved with. I actually started and got some funding during my second year of university to do a summer project. And I actually worked in an animal physiology and behavioural lab and absolutely loved it, loved working within the research environment, loved its challenges, loved how exciting it was, every day was different. And that's what really, I think, probably motivated me to pursue a career within research. It was at that time as well that I had a few modules on molecular medicine, molecular bioscience, and also oncology and cancer research. And that really, really fascinated me. So for my master's project, I decided to work in a molecular bioscience lab on an oncology project and loved it. Also, as part of my integrated masters, I got to do a short two-month industrial placement. I've had obviously no experience at that point of working in research outside of universities, but absolutely loved that that short placement. Found the pace really exciting, loved working with the new technologies. And that's what made me apply for an associate scientist role at Redx Pharma when I graduated and I completed my master's. So I worked there for a couple of years as an associate scientist, working on preclinical drug development, so setting up cell-based and biochemical in vitro-based assays to help screen and develop drugs in the early stage of preclinical drug development. And again, I wasn't necessarily told that not having a PhD would necessarily hinder my experience. Obviously, there were people that progressed without a PhD. However, I felt that to help me in my career progression, because I absolutely loved my role in industry, I decided I wanted to go and do a PhD. So I then went back from industry back into academia and completed a 4-year PhD at the University of Liverpool. Still within oncology, but it was much more of a basic research project. Got lots of different skills, lots of molecular biology skills. Although I found I learned a lot scientifically during my PhD, I just felt as though I was much more suited to working in an industrial environment. So after finishing my PhD, I'm now back in industry working as a research scientist at Redx Pharma, and we're based in Alderley Park in Cheshire. And we have a portfolio of preclinical and also clinical drugs for cancer and fibrosis. So I'm really enjoying that role. Also, like Scott, I'm also involved with ELRIG, and my involvement started during my PhD. As I said, mine was a sort of a basic, not translational necessarily project for my PhD, and I really wanted to still be involved with the drug discovery industry. So I went along to one of their conferences, their main flagship event, Drug Discovery, as a student volunteer, and loved it. They're all free to attend our ELRIG events, so that was meant that it was really great and open access. Since then, I helped with creating an early career professional work group, and through that with ELRIG, we've created and put on lots of different events to help support early career professionals within the life sciences community. And since the beginning of this year, I'm also a board member and company director of ELRIG, which has been a great addition to my day job.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can everybody hear me? Good, wave. Oh, good. Okay, fine. So that's fantastic, actually, little resumes from everybody there. I've got a couple of questions. I think since Jennifer was just talking, I'll start with you. Can you sort of look back over your career to date and then think what you could tell people about the pros and cons of industry and academia, sort of compare and contrast? That'd be really interesting, I think, to hear that.
Yeah, of course. So I suppose I've kind of had to weigh these up twice with doing a master's, going into industry, and then going back to do a PhD. So I'd say pros and cons. For me personally, I really like sort of the fast-paced environment of working in industry. You know, you've kind of got daily, weekly targets, which I really like. You have access to a lot of technology, and you know, you get exposed and get to work on quite a few different projects within different therapeutic areas potentially, which I really liked. But on the flip side to that, I do know some people prefer to work within an academic setting because they much prefer to be immersed for longer periods within projects. Not to say you can't get that within industry. Some people prefer, I suppose they call it the freedom within working with in academia. Obviously, you've got to, obviously all academic research has to be funded, so you've got to work within what, you know, the project that you're funded for. Some people potentially found that they like the sort of freedom to explore different areas within academia. I think also in the past years, potentially I think there's maybe kind of less of a difference, and it's more of a blend between academia and industry. And there are also potentials to work as both. I've got colleagues that are postdoctoral research within an academic setting. I've also got other colleagues that have done PhDs with industrial partners. So I definitely think it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. I do think there are often now opportunities for collaboration between both industry and academia.
Very interesting, thank you. And another question, just one for Scott, actually. So you've made a transition from some pretty basic, you know, biology research, biochemistry research in a very tricky area, actually, picking chemokines, and then you moved through into your kind of assay development, design, product development, business development. I mean, number one, again, it'd be interesting to hear your comments on the differences and kind of what facilitated the transition for you, which clearly has worked well. But also, did you do any particular qualification or even, you know, non-qualification kind of online courses or anything like that? Just to, I'm thinking of like MBA stuff. I'm not necessarily a full MBA, but you know, how people in business think is quite different in many ways to how we think as scientists. And I've certainly found I've had to learn the ropes, you know, by changing mindset sometimes, and likewise with investors. So anyway, please, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, yep, definitely. I want to mirror pretty much everything that Jennifer said. You know, I started off wanting to be an academic scientist. I really didn't like the kind of understanding that you had to apply for a grant every 3 years, wanted more of a stable job, hence the reason why I wanted biotech. Assay development is what I am, you know, is what I do. I really enjoyed doing that. And the transition into an application specialist within applied biosciences is essentially the same thing. You're solving problems for customers. So that was an easy progression. What I like about the biotech and pharma area is that, you know, you essentially have more funding, more money, you have the ability to, you know, and certainly in my experience, I could switch between projects. I wasn't stuck to one project within academia, which is something I didn't really want to do. Moving on to the commercial world, being seen as a scientist within the commercial world is really important to me and has been in the past, and that's what an application specialist is. You're the expert on that technology. You're the go-to person for the customer, and you're seen as a scientist anyway. Moving to the commercial part of it, the sales part, I haven't done any MBAs yet, but it is something I plan to do. And actually, once you become an application specialist, you start thinking more commercial anyway. You know, so I think it was pretty a serendipitous, but also an easy transition. To be honest, it's really not that difficult. If you're a PhD scientist or an undergraduate that is running a technology or running a assay, you become the voice of customer of that for that particular company. So using that experience, you can reach out to the various suppliers and say, you know, I really like your product because of A, B, and C, and that makes it easy for you to actually do that transition. So I would encourage people that are using technologies within their undergrad or their PhD, if they are using a second technology or even running an assay, to talk to the people from that company, that commercial company, because you certainly would become an asset to that company for sure.
Thank you, Scott. So let's open up now to questions from the audience. I think Sandra, you're in charge of these, are you? Or you're going to fire them at me and no, you're going to do it, aren't you? I think. Is that right, Sandra?
You should be seeing the questions on your panel, Malcolm.
I'm not. Hang on. What, the little panel? From academia, what would that be is all I'm seeing. Question. Doing a master. I mean, no, I'm not really seeing them. It's all too small. Let me just blow it up. No, that's not helped. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's coming up now. Would you recommend going straight into a master's after doing the undergrad? Or would it be possible to get a few years in industry and then doing a master's? Gerard.
Hi, very good question. I don't really think there's a right or wrong answer here. I think it really is dependent on your personal interests at the time. I know many colleagues who have gone straight into a master's, then straight to a PhD. I know many colleagues who've had stints in industry, then gone back into academia. And I really don't think there is a right or wrong answer to that. I think it's really dependent on your personal situation and what your professional interests and aspirations are at different stages throughout your career. So I'm sorry there's no easy answer there, but it really is personally dependent on your situation.
Very good, thank you. Is there another question? Is that the only question? Because it's the only question in my panel. Sandra, are there more questions, or is this there is only one question? Because I've only got one question here. Can you answer me, please?
You can expand the questions box, Malcolm, and then you will be able to see all the questions that are coming through and scroll down.
Well, I can scroll down anyway, but I can still only see one question. So presumably you can see if I'm missing things. Why don't you read them out if you see them? Oh, hang on. Yeah, wait a minute. I can't do this. I can't see how to expand this box. How do I expand the box, Sandra?
So if you can see the little square with a little arrow that you have on the right-hand side of the questions panel, then you click that, you should be able to expand this, and then you will be able to see all the questions.
It's not expanding it. Sandra, this is wasting everybody's time. Do you think you can just read them out? Start from the top
Yeah.
and carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, so my colleague Hannah is going to start
I can
reading
read out the
them.
questions.
Mhm.
So, one for Jennifer. Do you get to be responsible and have a say in the projects you're involved in industry?
You hear me? Hi there.
Yes.
I think that's a really good question. Yes, definitely. I think it kind of depends with sort of what team you're working in, but absolutely I get a say. For instance, last week I found a paper that I thought was very relevant to our project about where we potentially might go for our next in vivo models. I sent it to my team leader, and that my views are very much taken on involved. I suppose I think it very much depends on sort of the company potentially that you work for. That's why I chose to work for kind of a smaller biotech company where potentially you have a bit more kind of influence. But absolutely, you're employed as a research scientist, you're not employed as a technician. So your input definitely most definitely is taken into account. I'd also say that I think working within academia has kind of helped me with that. Obviously, doing a master's or a PhD, or even just an honours project, when you have to direct your own project, you get used to always thinking about new ideas and things. So I definitely think working in academia has helped me with that in industry. But definitely, I do feel as though I have influence and can input into the projects that I'm working on.
Great, thank you. And then I've got one for all of the panelists. If you had to give a single piece of advice to anyone wishing to move away from academia, what would that be? So did you want to come to Gerard first?
Yes, certainly. I would like to really emphasize the importance of networking. I mean, this is important in any job search, in any industry, but before you make a move out of academia into industry, I mean, really do utilize your network, speak to people to find out what the differences are, what the challenges are. There's obviously no one size fits all. I mean, you can go into a small organization like Sosei Heptares, there are about 150 of us. Or if you compare that to my last organization, Pfizer, where there are over 100,000 people. So there are many, many different types of organizations within the life sciences world, and they all provide very different and unique opportunities. So in summary, the one thing that I'd really emphasize the importance of is utilizing your network to really understand what the opportunities are, where they are, and what they look like.
Great, thank you.
I can see it now. So I've managed to find out how to work the miracle. So shall I pick up now, Hannah?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, so right. How difficult is it for someone doing a postdoc without experience in industry to transition into industry? That's a question from Anupama. Who wants to pick that one up? Maybe Panchali? Not in industry yet, are you? It's not very good. That's a bad choice. It's back to Jennifer.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. There are many people within the company I work for who postdoced for many years. One of our team leads postdoced for over 10 years and then made the transition into industry. I'd say that if it's something that you're thinking about, very much echo what Gerard said about the importance of networking, things like ELRIG events where you've got a real mix of academia and industry and people there. That can really, really help, not only give you first-hand experience of what working industry is like. I'd also say do look out for things like at ELRIG events and also at different careers fairs. We can actually speak to recruiters. So a lot of like large pharmaceutical companies, people like AZ and GSK, will often be at careers and events fairs, and you can always speak to them and say, how am I best to market myself with many years of postdoctoral research experience, and I want to make that transition. So absolutely, I'd say it's not a barrier. I think it's just more thinking about other transferable skills that you've got from working in academia. But absolutely, there are many people working in industry that have made that transition after postdocing for you know, from a few years up to a number of years. So definitely, it's absolutely possible.
Right. Another one here. I mean, these are all slightly related, these questions, but do you need to do a master's or a PhD to get a job in industry? And if not, how do you get a job in industry? I think I'll probably pick that one up to give other people a break. I mean, no, you don't have to have a master's or a PhD to get a job in industry. It does very much depend on what your ambitions are and what company it is that you are joining. Some of them has some very good and well-worked career paths, irrespective of whether you have a PhD. But I do think if you're in research per se and wanting to stay in research, then it is sometimes quite difficult if you don't have a PhD. Having said that, I do know some very senior people in the industry who've made very successful careers, both of them GSK related, actually, you know, without one. But I don't know if other folks want to chip in. Maybe Scott. I mean, you've made the transition into BD ultimately, and you know, you
Definitely.
didn't do a PhD. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I think what Jennifer and Gerard said, it's all about networking, and sometimes you don't have that network as an undergrad. But you know, if you wanted to get into maybe not research, but in terms of the commercial world, there are always sales reps, there are always application specialists in your institute at some point. You know, what I would encourage you to do is talk to them, find out what that world is like. You know, people like myself and people in this industry are happy to tell you more about it, or even shadow, come along and see what you're doing for a day. In terms of you know, will you go somewhere without a PhD? Again, I agree exactly what Malcolm said. I know a lot of people that have gone very far without one, but in my experience, I needed one to go further up the kind of research area. And the key really is experience, right? You know, as an undergrad, I did 3 months experience in London. So do something, get some experience in a lab, because that puts you ahead of people that don't have that, even if it's a minimum of 3 months.
Very good, thank you, Scott. Another question. So for employers, and I'll ask Gerard to pick this one up, would they broadly prefer a placement year in industry, so I guess a 4-year degree, or an MSc, you know, which is kind of next year added on?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I think it's partly dependent on the organisation and their own probably implicit preferences. I think certainly my experience suggests a year's placement is probably as valuable as an MSc. I stress the value to you as an individual, understanding what the challenges and opportunities are within industry. So I would certainly recommend, if you have an opportunity to do a placement within industry, you undertake that to see what it's like. But that's not to say that a placement is more valuable than having an MSc. It is dependent on the particular organisation. It's probably dependent on the roles within that organisation as well.
Can I just add to that? I think it's very dependent on the role. We, for example, have people coming in as industrial trainee 1-year placements. They're very successful. Come from a number of universities, both in the sort of biochemistry area and as it happens in chemistry, but I don't think that really matters. I think it's the principle is that those folks are doing pretty much what they're doing in they're doing what their first degree is about. Okay, an MSc should really be not just the line extension of what you've already done. It should add some real new twist, I think, to your CV, to your skills, to your interest, and so you know, MRes's, MScs, whatever you want to call them. I think that's the purpose of it, really. It's not just a sort of add-on year. Whereas I think the industrial trainee, when they come into industry, they're very valuable and they're very often very employable because they have that hands-on experience and you know, it gives them a chance to shine. It gives them a chance to know whether this is a career for them as well. I think they're both very good things to do for different reasons, actually, quite different reasons. And if you're hiring, then you will evaluate an MS, an MRes or an MSc or whatever they're called, you know, quite differently, I think, to an IT student. We've got another pair of questions here, one from Sophie, and another one from that both relate to people coming towards the end of their contract. So Sophie's coming towards the end of her postdoc contract, and somebody else asking what's a single piece of advice if I want to get away from academia, which is kind of like escaping. It's kind of funny. And yeah, the transition one. And the other one is I've got 18 months of my PhD left. What would be the ideal time to approach people for jobs? That's not specifically about industry. I think that, on the other hand, I think there is a pretty good sort of clear track normally if you're in a good research institution that will allow you to start thinking about what you'll do if you're postdocing. Whereas if you're thinking about leaping into industry, you perhaps it's a little bit more directed at that. So to summarize, I'm coming towards the end of my contract / PhD. Is it too early to start making connections, or is it when's going to be too late? If I really want to get away, tell me how to, and what things can I do to give myself the best chance? So I'm throwing it open to the floor. Anyway, who's going to pitch in first on that one? Or I'll pick a bit.
I'll give it a go. So I said I took 4 years to do my PhD. It's a little white lie. It's 3.5 years, because when I was based in Dundee, I was already working there, writing my PhD up. So I would say at the kind of final year of your PhD, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to folks and doing that. In terms of again escaping from academia, it's not something you have to do, right? The postdocs are already set up. It makes it easy for you to do that and transition that way. Network has got to be the major thing. I mean, I don't know if you guys know about LinkedIn or even on LinkedIn. We can't network face-to-face at the moment because of COVID, which is a real pain. I'm sure we all understand that. But processes like LinkedIn will allow you to find people that can help you potentially escape from academia if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I linked it. There's a lot more. Sorry.
From a postdoc, sorry, I wanted to add something from a postdoc perspective, but because I thought, sometimes you're in a situation when your contract is ending and you are at loss what to do. You do not have enough publication, and you don't see like the end of the tunnel, that you'll end up with having a number of publication that would give you a chance to be a group leader or PI. I think there'll be a moment when you'd realize where your career is heading to. I think that realization is very important. And the jobs that's available for a postdoc really depends on where you're specialized. I mean, some of you would be more a generalist, and for those there are really quite a number of jobs in the market, I would say. But more bespoke ones, it's good to keep track from really early on. So if you're a very specialist, then the number of, it's a very pragmatic kind of approach I'm saying. So if you're more generalist and you're doing protein purification, for example, you'd be able to fit yourself into, there are a lot of jobs. But say if you're very specialist, then I should say really from a year before, keep track of what's going on, how many jobs are coming out in the market. Would you want to go that direction or want to change? So I would say really depending on what you want and what your skills are.
Yeah, if I can sort of extend that really, I do think that in some respects you can't start early enough researching the environment that you may find attractive to you to go into, whether it's academia or industry, because there are hundreds of biotechs now, and they're, you know, and some of them are really exciting, and they're small, and it's different, and there's a relatively few big pharma, and everybody knows who they are. But the hundreds of biotechs, you know, there are websites. I've given a sort of consolidated list to the biochemists, like actually, that I'm sure they'll find some way to make available to everybody, that tells you the names of all these companies in the UK. I mean, there are literally hundreds. And if you look at the biosciences more, or molecular biosciences more broadly, and take a sort of quite a, you know, wide definition of it, there's a lot of potential jobs for you. And I'm not suggesting you should do in-depth research every time, but you know, you can, browsing the web, watching the news, all the kind of Twittery kind of stuff that comes out, and the LinkedIn kind of stuff. It's not wasted if you do it in a sort of intelligent way. It can be completely wasted if you don't, but I think that's quite a good way to get some sort of handle on what's out there. It is fantastic what's out there, is all I can say. The other thing is that you don't be discouraged, really, if you think things are tough at the moment with what you're doing, because everybody I know who's done anything worthwhile has had those periods, particularly in science, because science is unpredictable. You're finding out new things, and sometimes those new things are very intractable to discover, or sometimes they're blind alleys. And you know, you shouldn't feel too put off by that. You got to battle through it, and I think that's what you'll find whether you're in industry or academia. You will find that, and so I'm just looking at more questions here. Done top tips for building a network. Let me just bear with me a minute. Done that one.
Quickly add to that as well, something that I hadn't heard of until I was actually involved with ELRIG, is there are such things as specialist scientific recruitment agencies. So if you're a postdoc, have a look, reach out to a scientific recruitment agency. That normally they can be specialised in certain areas, but that's a really good opportunity to maybe find of roles that you hadn't even heard of. And I'd also say if there potentially is a role in industry that you're really interested by but don't know how to get there, LinkedIn is such a brilliant tool. Find somebody who's got that role that you're maybe interested in and reach out to them. They may reply, they may not, but you could, you know, reach out to them and say, could I have a small conversation with you, and maybe hear more about how they got to where they're at.
Yeah, Gerard, briefly, recruiters. I mean, there are people who recruit at quite a junior level, aren't there now? You can comment on them.
Yeah, there are plenty of recruiters that specialise in the broad life sciences industry at all levels, and you know, these people are essentially salespeople. But do use your networking skills to reach out to them, because they'll have a good feel for what's going on within the industry and the clients that they serve. And I think, yeah, any networking conversation potentially can be very, very useful. I mean, I emphasised the importance of networking earlier. I think all the panelists have stressed the importance of it. So do feel free to reach out to recruiters just to understand what they're working on, what the sort of themes and general direction of the recruitment market is. And that will hopefully help inform your thinking.
Another question here from Isma Abdulzani for Scott and Jennifer, I think it is. Isma is currently, decided not to apply for a postdoc. It's currently a lab manager / research assistant. Would this limit my chance to transition into industry, especially if I still want to do bench work? So yeah, Scott, maybe you can pick that one up first, and then Jennifer.
Yep, not at all. You know, sadly, I had to do a PhD because I wasn't getting anywhere within my research career. But you know, the most important people, as far as I'm concerned, in a lab is lab managers, people that have been on the bench for so long. They've got so much more experience. Just because you have a PhD, the definition of PhD obviously is you can actually run your own research project. But you know, I see the main people that run labs are the people that work on the bench. You know, within the biotech and pharma that I've worked in, that doesn't hinder you whatsoever. So I would encourage you again, as we keep saying, use your network, reach out to us. I mean, even I'm sure we'd happily tell you, you know, people that you can reach out to. I've helped various people get jobs in different labs just using my network. It doesn't hinder you at all.
Anything to add to that, Jennifer, or shall I?
No, yeah, absolutely, in total agreement with Scott. Sounds like you've got a wealth of experience, so don't underplay your skills and your transferable skills that you've got, particularly as a manager. You know, you've got project management experience, you've obviously got a wealth of lab experience. You know, I'm sure a recruiter would, you know, look very fondly on that. So absolutely don't undersell your transferable skills, and definitely the importance of networking.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, actually. I think it's very important when you put yourself forward to do it in the right sort of way. And I think there's quite a lot of advice for that now in terms of like writing CVs and things. But the core of it is just be confident in what you've done. Don't worry too much about whether it's right for industry. Frankly, there's no difference in, you know, if you're a scientist between what you do in industry and what you do in academia. There might be differences in the number of projects you do per year. There might be the differences in the way things are managed and structured and things like that. But there's fundamentally, you want people that can work effectively, you know, with the skills that they have, with the knowledge and intelligence that they bring. And I think, you know, now in academia is just like industry. You want people who can work collegiately. You know, it was sort of the case if you go back decades that you could do an awful lot on your own and make progress and publish papers if it was just you. It's awfully hard to do that now, certainly in the biosciences. I mean, you know, you see like 50 names on a paper. I mean, it's like it changed dramatically. And so you want people who can teamwork to a reasonable degree, at least superficially, even if underneath they just, you know, don't really enjoy it. Everybody's got to be able to interrelate. So there's one question for Scott here. As a fourth year PhD student, I'm wondering, how do you feel stress management in industry compares to academia? Might be a question for the academic lab if it's, you know, if the person is feeling stressed, but it's not great. But anyway, carry on, Scott, have a go at that.
I think there's stress in everybody's job, right? It just depends on how you handle it, right? I mean, if I look at academia, the reason why I went to industry is I didn't want to have to apply for a grant every year. And now I'm a salesman, and every year my target is wiped and I start again, right? So I've went full circle. So stress management, I guess at this time, you know, do what you enjoy, right? Get out walking if you can, get out doing some exercise. You know, I'm luckily enough, I live close to the country, I can get out. There are people you can talk to, right? So, you know, talk to colleagues, you know, again.
Yeah, I was just going to see if Gerard could comment. I was going to say that, I mean, we do have in industry, you do tend to get some attention paid to this as a sort of duty of care thing, and availability through maybe health insurance that you might have of online service, you know, so somebody you can phone up. Yeah, that's who's kind of expert. But Gerard, I mean, is it speaking broadly? Well, you know, for the industry, I mean, and what you've seen in academia as well. Do you see much difference or?
No, I personally don't actually. In terms of my experience, either within industry or academia, I think all organisations today really take their duty of care to employees quite seriously. So most organisations, as we do at Sosei Heptares, have an employee assistance programme, for instance, which is a confidential ability to speak with counsellors about anything that might be troubling you. I think Scott's advice around exercise, speaking out and reaching out to people, friends and colleagues is incredibly important. But as I say, all organisations, regardless of whether it be academia or scientific industry, do have a duty of care for employees and treat it far more seriously than they perhaps did 10, 20 years ago. So do feel free to reach out to your employer if you're stressed, and I'm sure they will have various interventions that they can offer you.
Yeah, there's another question here, which I'd like to sort of follow on from their question. Would you say working in the industrial field is a higher source of pressure for results from hierarchy or other things than working in academia? So, I mean, one quick comment on that is that, you know, we do have and take very seriously now, and any reputable company would do this, checks and balances in place within an organization so that pressure from hierarchy or whatever, well, there is a, you know, sometimes there is management and there, you know, but it should always be constructive and it should always be trying to help the person and the company at the same time. You know, if you do one and not the other, there's something going to blow up, to be honest. So you kind of have to do that. And actually, some of the worst cases of hierarchical sort of bullying, as it were, that I've seen have actually come in academia, where sometimes those checks and balances were not in place, or indeed people were just floating around without any help and without sort of somebody to talk to, and perhaps the head of the lab was totally focused on their results and their publications, and that was it. So I think it kind of evens out. Probably I wouldn't, but anyway, I should let other people speak. So anybody else want to contribute on that one? Panchali?
So, I mean, this in academia, it's hard to get your voices to be heard. That's one point I had experienced, or I would say. But in industry, there is more strata. So you could reach out to people. There are more checks and balances in this aspect. And as everyone pointed out, health and well-being is very important, because that we think is very important for employees to perform, give the best performance. So you are much more protected. Your voices will be heard. If you feel over pressure, like too much stress, you could always there are options to talk out, to get help from others. I know, as Malcolm said about the teamwork thing, but at least you can reach out for help. So I would say mental balance, there's much more scope in industry than academia. That's my experience. You're not left alone. So in academics, there's a pressure to publish, there's a pressure, your contract is coming to an end. So, and the project you have been working for so long, there's competitors around, you have to hurry up. So in that way, of course, there are pros and cons. Even in industry, you need to support chemistry. So you have to hurry up with your work, or you have to support another, like say biopharma. But I would say you have the option that, look, I have too much pressure, I can't handle it anymore, I need help. You have that option.
Yeah, I would say actually that a lot of the worst, so a lot of the most stress-inducing issues are between people at a similar level. And you know, the requirement of one to give something to the next. I mean, the thing is with industry, that this probably is a difference, is that it is a chain, really. I mean, not a chain of command, I don't mean that. I mean, it's sort of chain left to right of doing things, passing them on, passing information back and forth, passing reagents back and forth, and then moving on to the next step. And everything is very, very, very heavily scrutinized at each point, because it has to be, because you totally sink or swim by what you've done as an organization. you can't basically write it up and very bad stuff. If I want to put it that way, it's kind of all there. There's no hiding place, and therefore people do, have to measure up for that, I suppose. But I don't see that in most cases. I see that as positive stress in most cases. People just want to do the best thing and get the best outcome. And it culminates in a drug candidate, it culminates in a successful assay design, it culminates in a new piece of kit that ups throughput by tenfold or something like that. These are all great achievements that people can share in. But academia is full of that as well, and tremendous thrills. So I think we're all just lucky to be scientists, all working close to science. Sandra, are we running out of time? I haven't checked the time. Yes, we are. I think we're timed out now. So thanks everybody, and thanks to the attendees. I do apologise if I didn't get to your question. And bye for now. Yeah.